Hey guys, what is up and welcome back to the channel. Now that Cemu 1.17.1 is released to everyone in the public, this is my full and complete setup guide that's going to give you the best possible performance regardless of if your computer is very low end or very high end. In order to have the best possible compatibility with any games you're going to play on this emulator, I want you to make sure that your GPU drivers and for the most part all of the drivers on your system are as up to date as possible. This is very important, especially so if you're going to be using the Vulkan API backend. Everything you'll require for this guide can be found down in the description of this video, including any specific timestamps for any sections of the guide you may need. Now that all that information's out of the way, let's jump straight over to my desktop and get this guide started. So the first thing you want to do is to download the zip file for your Cemu 1.17.1 version and your latest Cemuhook version. In this video, I'm also going to be showing you how you can update an older version of the emulator. For now, you're going to be right-clicking, selecting 7-zip and extracting this to Cemu 1.17.1, a folder of its own. Next, you're going to open this folder and drag and drop your Cemuhook zip file here. Next, right-click again and using 7-zip, select extract here. This is going to give you your dbghelp.dll and keystone.dll. You can delete this web link right here since we don't need it. Next, let's drag and drop the zip file back to our desktop, and since we're done with these two files, we can now delete them. Next, I'm going to show you how you can update an older version of Cemu emulator. This can be done in 2 easy steps. The first step is to simply launch Cemu, and if you've activated the auto updater for the emulator, it's going to prompt you to update the emulator to its latest version. I simply select yes, select update, and it's going to begin the process of auto updating. Once updated, select restart and the emulator should relaunch itself. To activate this setting, come to the Options General Settings section and activate Automatically Check for Updates. This is going to do exactly as I've shown. It's going to automatically update the emulator when there's a new version available. The other way of manually updating is also very simple. All you have to do is highlight all of the new files, select Copy, and then paste these files over your older ones. Select Replace all of the files in the destination, and this is the manual way to update Cemu emulator. In the event that you want to do a fresh install for the best possible performance, let's continue. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is right-click your Cemu exe, come to the Properties tab at the bottom, and then come to Compatibility. You want to make sure to run this as administrator, disable full screen optimizations, and in Change High DPI settings have these two options right here, selecting it to scale by application. Once done, click Apply, then click OK, and you are now done with Cemu compatibility settings. Now that we're finished with that, we can launch Cemu emulator for the first time. All you need to do is double click it and it's going to open Cemu, and it should prompt you like so to download the latest graphics packs for use with the emulator. Simply select yes, and as you can see, it's going to start downloading all of these latest graphics packs to your graphics pack folder. Once you've done that, it's going to launch the emulator. You can see we're running 1.17.1, and in a few minutes we're going to be configuring our general settings. Our next step, however, is to click Download Now and get these shared fonts that come thanks to the utilization of Cemuhook. If you haven't installed Cemuhook, please make sure you've done so as I showed before. Next, we're going to come to General Settings and set up our MLC and game paths, but first, please make sure to activate the Automatically Check for Updates option. This is going to make sure that your emulator stays as up to date as possible when a new version releases. For this MLC folder path, I would highly advise creating a Cemu emulator backup like so, and inside that create this folder titled MLC01. This is going to create a safe place to store your game saves, updates and DLCs, and also keep them off of your OS drive, making sure that you utilize your storage the best. For this game paths section, we're going to click this add button, and then I'm going to navigate again on my computer where all of my games are stored. Mine are here in this Wii U games folder. You do not want to individually select your games. Instead, you want to select the folder in which they are all contained. Do so, and once you have your MLC and game paths selected, once I click X on this window, all of my titles are going to be updated like so. You can also see that since I had previously installed my game updates and DLCs, they are now also correctly showing in version. If you want to add games to your favorite, simply right click, hit the favorite button, and you'll see that they will be added to the very top of your games list like so. As I previously stated, it's very important that you update any and all of your games to their latest version. To do so, simply click File, install a game update or a DLC, then navigate to wherever on your computer your updates are stored. You can see that mine are right here in my updates folder. These are my update and DLC data for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. To install the update, simply navigate to the meta folder, select the meta or meta.xml file and simply install the file. As you can see, since I already have mine installed, I can click the no button since I don't need to reinstall it. However, if you do not have your game updated to version 2.08, please make sure to do so, as it is integral for getting the best performance out of Breath of the Wild, and indeed running it at 60 frames per second if you wish to do so. As before with the DLC, do the exact same thing, scroll back and select your DLC's meta file, install it, and once you're at v2.08 for version and v80 for DLC, your game is now optimally set up for the best performance. Let's now apply some settings to the emulator. So for now, we're going to be coming to our CPU tab. For mode, we're going to be leaving this at single core recompiler globally. This is very important since the majority of games on Cemu are only going to function best when using single core. For affinity, I would highly advise leaving this just at all logical cores, though you should experiment with first and last logical cores to see if you get any difference in performance when using those. Our next step is to move to debug, custom timer, and even though Cemu default and QPC these days give the exact same performance, I prefer to use QPC myself since it allows me to use these different speed timers shown below. Even if you're not going to be using the speed timers, I would still advise you to set it to QPC. You should also be setting timer accuracy to 1 millisecond. So use QPC at 1x speed and an timer accuracy of 1 millisecond. Now I would also highly advise that you use Cemuhook H.264. While the emulator doesn't require you to use this, I find the video quality much better with Cemuhook's H.264 implementation. Another thing I would highly advise you to make sure you're not using is any of these debug options. If you come to this logging section and there's a tick box like this, please make sure that none of these are selected since it's going to dramatically slow down your emulator gameplay and performance. Now that we've covered all of that, let's come to options, general settings, and go over all of the different settings you're going to be using here. For language, you can select it from this drop-down window, and to be honest, we've covered pretty much everything in this general setting. Moving over to graphics, you can see under Graphics API, you can use the experimental Vulkan renderer. This is by far going to give you the best experience if you're using an AMD or Intel GPU. Now, if you're using an NVIDIA GPU, you can still get better performance by using OpenGL. However, for the best out-of-the-box experience on Cemu, I would highly advise using Vulkan. Precompiled shaders should be set to auto. VSync, for me, I set it at off. However, you should experiment between double and triple buffering. These options were only recently added, so if you're having any issues with VSync or any other tearing issues, please experiment with these two settings. One thing I want to stress to you is that if you're using Vulkan, this full sync at GX2 drawdown option is always going to be on regardless of what you set it to. However, if you're using OpenGL and have it disabled, you can get a dramatic boost in performance. So if you're using OpenGL, please make sure to leave full sync at GX2 drawdown disabled. For upscale and downscale filter, leave this at bilinear. Full screen scaling wants to be kept at keep aspect ratio. And if you want to enable your frame rate overlay, I would set it to your top right. And I would also leave your notifications at shader compiler, leaving this in the top left. For scale, I like to set these to 150 to make them a little bit bigger and more visible in the emulator window. Let's move on to audio next, where we're going to be setting our direct sound to X Audio 2. If you experience any crackling or strange stuttery audio, I would advise turning your latency up to a value of something like 72 milliseconds. If you don't have any issues, just leave it at 24. For your primary TV device, I'd advise changing it from stereo to surround. And if you're using gamepad audio, set it again to your primary sound driver, making sure to turn up your volume so you can actually hear your device. Moving on to account settings, it is in this section that you can add additional users in the event that you have multiple people on your computer or in your household playing games on the emulator. To create an additional user, simply click Create, enter the me name, and there you go, you can see that this additional user has been created and can be selected from this drop-down window right here. Again, if you wish to delete any accounts you have created or that aren't in use, simply highlight the account you wish to delete, click delete and click yes. And there you go, you can see it has been successfully deleted. Once you've applied any and all of these settings shown, you are now done with Cemu general settings setup. Next up, we're going to be setting up your input devices since you're going to be requiring a controller to play any of these games optimally. In your emulated controller, you want to select Wii U Gamepad, then you need to select which controller API you're using. For me, I use X input, so I'm going to select X input and my controller from the drop down window. Then I'm going to quickly map and set up my controller configuration. For this blow my button, I generally leave this as the F key on my keyboard and I leave this show screen section blank. To set up the rumble settings on your controller, click additional settings and then adjust your rumble or button threshold options to suit your own needs. I myself leave it at 0% to preserve my battery life and 50% for button threshold. Now in Cemu 1.17.1 they have added this indicator for thumbstick dead zones, so in the event that your thumbsticks or analog sticks are displaying any symptoms of drift, please adjust your dead zones to a point where they are no longer activating outside of this circle. For my own sticks on my DualShock 4 controller, I'm going to adjust my dead zones down since on my own thumbsticks I do not have any drift issues. Once you have any and all of these settings applied, come up to Profile, then you need to assign this a profile name. I'm just going to call this Pad1, click Save, and when I come to this drop down window, there you go, you can see my saved controller profile. If you're playing any games with multiplayer features, you are going to need to set your first controller to the Wii U gamepad as usual, and every additional controller to the Wii U Pro controller. Once you've set to the Pro controller, simply map and set up all of your settings as before. Again, please make sure to set the first controller as Wii U gamepad and every additional controller as Wii U Pro. We are now done with input settings. Let's close the window and continue with setup. The next step in our guide is going to be to right click your game, and we are now looking for the Edit Graphics Packs option. Once you click this, it's going to open up the graphics pack window. Let's drag this to center screen for a bit more clarity. So for Breath of the Wild, you see we have enhancements, graphics, mods, and workarounds. Let's start from the top and move downwards. For the best performance, you're going to be enabling no depth of field. You can enable clarity, though if you're using the Vulkan API, it can give you some visual issues with a game looking a little bit too blue or too dark at times. So for this, we're just going to be enabling no depth of field. Next up, let's move to graphics, where we're going to be enabling resolution and shadow resolution. For resolution, you select it, and from this drop-down window on the right, you can select whatever resolution you wish to use for your game. Similarly, for shadow resolution, you can select whichever value you need to use, though personally I just use medium or 100% default. Now if you want to use a higher resolution, you can do that either, but just as a default for the best performance for everyone, I'm going to be selecting 1920 by 1080. Next up, moving on to our mods section, you want to turn on all of these FPS++ options, leaving dynamic game speed at 32 frames average. For fence method, we're going to be using a performance fence. It is the best one for performance, obviously. NPC stutter fix needs to be activated in the event that you're not using a GX2 drawdown with OpenGL. This gives a massive performance boost, and for set FPS limit, you're going to be leaving this at 60 frames per second. Now, if you want to unlimit your frame rate, set it to 165 frames per second, and in Breath of the Wild, in the event that you're getting any strange crashes on cutscenes or having any issues, for example in the Thunderblight Ganon Temple, you should set this to 30 frames per second, play through that section, and then swap back to 60 frames per second. In this mods area, you can see we have a hell of a lot of other options, but for the best performance, all you need to activate is FPS++. Let's close off this mods section now and move on to workarounds. You can see everything here is clearly labeled. These are GPU specific workarounds for OpenGL only, so for whatever GPU you're using, be it AMD, Intel, or NVIDIA, activate the options that are specific to you. If you're not using OpenGL, you don't need to activate any of these graphics packs, but as I said, if you are, please activate the ones that are specific to your GPU brand. If you're using Vulkan, make sure to activate grass swaying as it fixes some strange grass behavior, and if you're using an Intel iGPU with Vulkan, make sure to activate this Intel GPU shadows fix. Additionally, if you're using any GPU with OpenGL, please make sure to activate these two graphics packs. These are especially important if you're using OpenGL and an NVIDIA or AMD GPU. They help with crashes and graphical output in the game. Again, if you're using Vulkan, do not activate them, but in the event that you are using OpenGL, please remember to turn on these graphics packs. For Breath of the Wild, those are all of the graphics packs you need. For many other games, it is a much simpler setup. For example, here in Wind Waker HD, all you need to turn on is resolution, shadow resolution, and these three fix workaround graphics packs. As before, for resolution and shadow resolution, you can select their different presets from these drop-down windows. It does have a few other options, but they aren't critical to getting the game up and running in its best format. This is pretty much the circumstance for every other game on the emulator. Next up, we're going to come to Edit Game Profile. It is in this profile that you have some of the most important options for performance. For example, for your CPU recompiler, you are going to need to activate a mode that matches the amount of cores or threads that the CPU in your computer has. Please set this to an option that matches the overlay you can see on screen right now, also remembering to set threaded quantum to 100,000 cycles. Next up, moving over to graphics. Here we, to be honest, don't really need to change much now. There is, however, one thing you can change, the shader mull accuracy option. This is only going to affect you if you have a very low RAM amount and are using OpenGL with an NVIDIA GPU. So if you're using OpenGL with an NVIDIA GPU and have a very low RAM amount, set shader mull accuracy to min instead of true, otherwise just leave it at the system default. For controllers, to be honest, we don't need to change anything here, and as long as you've done everything I've explained so far, you now have the most optimal settings for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Again, for Wind Waker and many other games, there's not much you need to change here. You should just leave this at single core recompiler, set threaded quantum to 100,000. We are setting this recompiler mode to single core because it is by far the most compatible mode with every single game on the emulator. Not many games support multi-core recompilers like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild does. In newer Cemu versions, we also have some handy user interface settings. For example, if you want to edit the name of your game, you can right-click, select Edit Name and change it to whatever you want. Click OK, and there you go, you can see it has been edited. You also have handy access, again by right-clicking your game, to a game directory, the save directory of your game, the update and DLC directory, as well as access to different icon styles or user interface style options. This is highly user preference, but if you click style icons, it swaps you over to a user interface that looks more like this. And again, if you right click, select style small icons, it swaps over to smaller icons with the games listed as so. Personally, I think I prefer the list option since it gives you much more information on your games, but again, this is purely subjective, so use whatever suits you the best. For now, we're going to be closing Cemu and going over some GPU, CPU and RAM optimizations that you can apply to your computer. If you're using an NVIDIA GPU, what you want to do is right-click on your desktop, then select NVIDIA Control Panel. Once the control panel opens, you want to come to Adjust Image Settings with Preview, select Use the Advanced 3D Image Settings, and then click Take Me There. Once in this section, come to Program Settings, then click this Add button at the top of the section right here. Once you click Add, your Cemu version which you just used should appear at the very top of the window, highlighted, and choose Add Selected Program. Next, you're going to scroll down to the bottom of the window. Personally, I set VSync to off, though if you're having any screen tearing issues, you should set this to adaptive or fast. Since I use a 144Hz screen, I'm going to be setting this to off since I have no issues with screen tearing. Triple buffering wants to be set to on. Threaded optimization needs to be set to on. This is by far the most important setting in this window. Scroll up a little bit further, you want to set power management mode to prefer maximum performance, and you also want to make sure that your OpenGL rendering GPU is set to your most powerful GPU, in my case my 1080 Ti. Once you make any and all of the changes shown, make sure to hit apply. Then once applied, you can close this NVIDIA control panel window. Next up, we're going to be adjusting some Windows power plan settings. Simply right click your Windows icon in the bottom left hand corner, select power options, then select additional power settings right here. You want to make sure that instead of using a power saver or the balanced power profiles, you are using high performance power plan. These high-performance power plans can significantly boost your performance on your CPU, especially so if you're using a laptop. Now that we've covered GPU and CPU optimizations, I'm going to show you how you can apply a Pagefile or a virtual memory pool. You need to open your control panel, come to System and Security, System, then come to Advanced System Settings. Once in this section, you want to come to this Performance section and click Settings, then in here come to the Advanced tab. Inside this advanced area, you are looking for this virtual memory section. Our next step is to click this change button, and then on your fastest SSD or storage device, you want to select it, then set a custom size, both maximum and initial, of 10,000. Please be aware that by doing this, you are going to use 10 GB of storage on said storage drive, but in doing so, you are going to massively boost the stability of all of your games, especially so if you have a very low RAM amount, for example 4, 8 or 12 GB. After applying this Pagefile, please remember to restart your system if you've never used one before. Once you've done so, you now have all of the most optimal settings for the running and utilization of Cemu Emulator. All that you now need to do is load up Cemu, run any of your games, and once you've built your shader cache for them, you are going to have the best possible experience on this emulator that you could possibly have. As always, if you're having any issues with anything shown in this video or guide, please join my Discord server. You'll find a link for it down in the description, and ask any questions you could possibly have. For now at least, that's the conclusion of this guide. Once again, thank you all very much for watching it. If you enjoyed, leave it a thumbs up down below. If you enjoy these kinds of videos, hit the subscribe button. And if you're already subscribed, please hit the bell icon to get notified whenever I release any new videos. Once again guys, thank you all very much for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you all in the next one.